there is no state with more active election lawsuits than Pennsylvania. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Mark Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. There are currently 14 active election lawsuits in the state of Pennsylvania. 6 of those lawsuits were filed in 2022, 2023, and 8 of them were filed so far this year in 2024. Mark, why is Pennsylvania such a hotbed for election litigation?
Okay, first and foremost, before we get the hate comments, I know it's a commonwealth. I know it. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I get it. Don't write in. We called it a state. It's a state also. It's a commonwealth state, a state commonwealth. In fact, Paige, they have in Pennsylvania the Commonwealth courts. A lot of the cases we're talking about are in the Commonwealth courts. So we know that. So here is the deal. Pennsylvania is a hotbed of litigation because of 2 things. Number one, it is a very close battleground state, right? So if you looked at what are the states with the most litigation, it wouldn't surprise you. Democracy Docket tracks this. Literally minute by minute, day by day, they track how many cases are filed in what state, by whom, how many are pro-democracy, how many are anti-democracy, what is the RNC doing, what are the good guys doing. So I hope everyone subscribes to Democracy Docket. But it is a hotbed of litigation because, number one, it is a battleground state. But number 2, it has relatively complicated laws, particularly around the requirements to vote by mail. There are states that you vote by mail and it's like really super easy. And then, Paige, you have the state of Pennsylvania.
Let's dig into these lawsuits. So these 14 lawsuits fall into 3 main categories: mail-in voting, election administration, and registration requirements. Half of these lawsuits touch on mail-in voting in some way, but there's one specific topic that most of these mail-in lawsuits are about: undated and wrongly dated mail-in ballots.
Yeah. So look, let's just start with the obvious. What we're about to discuss is nuts. Okay. Like, it is crazy that in the state of Pennsylvania, your ballot that you filled out yourself with your vote and everything about that ballot is correct gets thrown out because you put it in an envelope to mail in. You sign the back of that envelope, right? Like you're supposed to. And then next to it, you fail to complete the proper date. That's right. Like, you failed to complete the proper date. So there is a lot of litigation right now about what do you do if either the date you put next to your signature is the wrong date, or you just don't put a date at all, right? So there, you might think there are only a few ways you could screw this up. It turns out in Pennsylvania, there are a lot of ways you can screw this up. Number 1, you don't put any date. Number 2, you put a date in the future. Number 3, you put a date too far in the past. Number 4, you put the month and the day, but not the year. You put the year, but not the month. You put, who knows, right? There's all different ways that people can put a date. There's people who put the month before the year, people who put the year before the month, people who put all 4 digits for the year, people who put just 2 digits for the year. And the fact that we're having a conversation where Republicans want to throw out ballots and are trying to convince courts to throw out ballots because of the improper combination of date numbers and months is really a testament to how much they hate democracy.
And Mark, to be clear, the only issue with these ballots is the handwritten date that the voter did or did not put on the envelope. These are ballots from eligible voters who got a proper mail-in ballot, filled it out properly, returned it on time. The election officials have it in their hands by the deadline. There's absolutely no question about the eligibility of these ballots. It is simply about whether or not the voter wrote the correct full date on the outer envelope.
Right. And what you have is a familiar lineup here. You have pro-voting organizations who are arguing that these ballots need to count. And you have the Republican Party and their allies saying, no, these ballots shouldn't count, which, by the way, goes to the whole lie that Republicans tell about how they now favor mail-in voting. If you favor mail-in voting, Mike Whatley, RNC chair, if you want to show you really favor mail-in voting, how about in Pennsylvania, you switch sides in the litigation and you say no one's mail-in ballot should be disqualified because the date on the outer envelope isn't just absolutely picture perfect. This is a long-standing, but they won't do it. And Paige, this is not like the first time the Republicans have picked one of these ridiculous fights. The dates are the new naked ballots.
Mark, I'm glad that you mentioned that because the issue of naked ballots is back in 2024. It was a big issue in 2020. The ACLU is currently suing Butler County to give voters a chance to cure naked ballots. Both Democrats and Republicans have gotten involved in the lawsuit. Remind us what's at stake with these ballots.
Okay, so it is called a naked ballot in Pennsylvania because when you vote your ballot, you fill in the ovals or, you mark the box, whatever the county requirement is. You have filled out your ballot correctly. There is nothing wrong with your ballot. In Pennsylvania, you're supposed to take that ballot, fold it up, and put it inside an envelope that does nothing other than hold the ballot. Literally has no function other than to hold the ballot. You then take that envelope, that is just a blank envelope that they give you, and you put that inside another envelope. And that is the envelope that is the mailing envelope that goes back to the county. That's the one where you need to sign and put the date, right? And so what has been fought over now since 2020, since before the 2020 election, is what happens if you take your ballot and you skip that middle envelope, that envelope that does nothing other than hold the ballot. You just put it in the return mail envelope. Well, it turns out in Pennsylvania, your ballot doesn't count. Like, why it doesn't count? Why do you need that middle envelope? For no good reason. But Republicans want your ballot not to count if you are not in that middle envelope. That is called a naked ballot. It is naked because it is in the outer envelope without that inner envelope. They're not really naked. They're kind of like partially clothed, right? Because it's still secret, right? It's still in the mail-in envelope, right? So no one's seeing who you voted for at that point, but when it's going through the mails. But this has been a big fight. The courts have frankly said so far that the naked ballot shouldn't count. The Republican Party has litigated that position. Their allies have litigated that position, and there are still groups that are trying to argue that this is crazy and that those ballots need to count. So that litigation continues as well.
So we have wrongly and undated mail-in ballots and naked mail-in ballots. What other issues are there around mail-in voting?
I mean, look, Republicans want to make it harder to vote, and they want to make it harder to vote by mail. So, we've talked about this in other states. Any part of the mail-in voting process that Republicans can make harder, they will make harder. Any part of the process that can lead to lawful ballots being discarded and not counting, they will do. So everything they say about wanting people to vote by mail, whether they call it swamp the vote, bank the vote, this the vote, that the vote, whatever videos they cut, is all just propaganda and lies because their lawyers are in court attacking every aspect of the voting process. So look, there is a lawsuit by Republican state lawmakers challenging whether counties can set up drop boxes. They are opposing drop-off sites and satellite offices for return mail-in ballots. The Chester County Republican Party claims that third parties can't return ballots on behalf of voters in long-term care facilities. What aspect of the mail-in voting do they like? None. They sued to challenge every aspect of the mail-in voting process because they want it to be harder to vote. And that is just something I wish, if there's one thing that everyone listening to this, I hope, takes away from both what I write on Democracy Docket, what else you see on Democracy Docket, and what you see in these videos is that, if you are not already subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters, click in the link below in the show notes. You will get a steady stream of concise, digestible information about how Republicans are scheming and what these small, seemingly small issues are that they are trying to disqualify ballots for that can be the difference maker in close elections. So again, make sure you are subscribed to Democracy Docket. It is free, and there is a link in the show notes below.
Mark, it seems like in past elections, there were a lot of lawsuits about who could vote by mail, who was eligible to get a mail-in ballot. But all of these lawsuits are kind of about the mechanics and technicalities of mail-in voting. How do you vote by mail? Where can you vote by mail? What ballots get rejected? Why has there been that change in focus from who can vote by mail to how you vote by mail?
Yeah, I think it's largely because the who can vote by mail fights have been litigated, and the Republican Party has lost. I mean, part of their media strategy of saying we want our people to vote by mail is in part a recognition that they have not successfully defeated vote by mail as a who can do it. So fundamentally, they now are trying to get their people to do it as well. But what they have focused on now, which is not a dumb legal strategy on their part, like we should not underestimate their lawyers. Like the days of the Jenna Ellis's, the Rudy Giuliani's, and the Sidney Powell's are in the rearview mirror for the Republican Party. They are hiring high-priced, lawyers to try to attack the vote by mail process, and they're doing it now in much more subtle ways. So you can have the same effect of disqualifying ballots by focusing on things like dates and naked ballots as you can by simply attacking, like Rudy Giuliani did, all mail-in ballots. In fact, it's a much smarter legal strategy in that, Rudy Giuliani was never going to throw out all mail-in ballots, but you can affect the outcome of elections, particularly close elections, by finding these pressure points or these friction points in the voting process and trying to target those. And in doing so, disqualifying more mail-in ballots, and particularly, Republicans target those pressure points or friction points that affect minority voters and young voters. And so by looking at which categories of voters uses what method of voting and what kinds of small errors or technicalities or election administration issues confront different kinds of voters, they can affect the outcomes of elections by targeting different demographics effectively. And it is the job of everyone in the pro-democracy, pro-voting camp to recognize that these attacks on democracy can be as potent and as outcome determinative as the lawsuits we may have seen them engage in 2020 or the aftermath of the 2020 election. So we need to be vigilant. We need to treat these seriously. But that is why this strategy has focused from the general into these more specific areas. It is just as dangerous for democracy. And it is the reason why Democracy Docket's coverage is actually more important now than ever before, because you all, frankly, Paige, at Democracy Docket, break down why each of these lawsuits is important and what the strategy is that's going into it.
So those are the 8 lawsuits dealing with mail-in voting. What kind of lawsuits are we seeing around election administration and voter registration in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so election administration is kind of the new mail-in voting. We are seeing Republicans around the country attack the administration of elections. So, I oftentimes say Republicans want to make it harder to vote, easier to cheat. Think of election administration as the easier to cheat part of the program that Republicans are engaged in. They are attacking the way in which elections run elections and ballots are counted. So look, we see Republican groups and candidates and lawmakers, challenging to make it easier to watch polls and who can be poll watchers and who can be poll workers. There is also, by the way, the return of the fringe independent state legislature theory. This was the fringe theory that made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. My law firm actually fought against this in a case in North Carolina and won. But this is the case. This is the theory that says that state courts can't apply their state constitutions to protect voters in federal elections. And there is a group of Republican state lawmakers that are challenging executive action by the Biden administration and Governor Shapiro that expanded voter registration opportunities. That's right. They are literally claiming that the governor and the president of the United States can't have their state agencies promote voter registration on a nonpartisan basis. We've seen Republicans claim that the state is letting overseas voters register to vote without required ID. This is nothing short of an attack on our men and women in uniform who are stationed overseas that are given rights under federal law, along with other overseas voters, special rights under a federal law to make sure that they don't get disenfranchised. This is a statute, by the way, Paige, a few years ago would have been unthinkable for Republicans to attack. They used to be the big promoters of making sure that overseas voters and military voters were not denied the right to vote. We have a Republican or a conservative group called VoteRef that is literally suing to access and publish information about individual voters and individual voting behavior and history on a public website. I promise you, they are not looking to put it on a website to facilitate voting. They are looking to put it on a public website to either facilitate harassment or challenges or other forms of anti-voting behavior. So I could go on and on about all of the ways in which Republicans in Pennsylvania and around the country are challenging to make it easier for them to intimidate and arrest voters, easier to throw away lawful votes, to frankly cheat after the election. But we would run out of time on this video. The best thing I can tell you is go to Democracy Docket right now and subscribe. You can become a paid member for Democracy Docket as well by clicking in the link below.
What do you think happens between now and Election Day? Do most of these lawsuits get resolved before people start to vote?
So a lot of cases are going to get resolved before Election Day. Right now, just to put this in perspective, we mentioned the 14 cases pending in Pennsylvania. There are more than 140 lawsuits pending across the country. So Pennsylvania has the most, but a lot of the states you would expect, the battleground states, have a lot of litigation, but even states that you wouldn't necessarily expect but are critical to the outcome of 2024 have a lot of litigation pending. And we are going to see a lot of cases get decided between now and Election Day. Will all of them get decided? No. There are some of these cases that Republicans are filing that honestly, I don't even think they want decided before Election Day. I think they have filed them and they want them sort of hanging over this process. They want them sort of coming in and out of the scene like Hamlet's father, kind of like a ghost that threatens to upend the play. And that is why Democracy Docket covers both what's happening that will be decided before Election Day and why those cases are lingering in the mist over Election Day and how Republicans are trying to cause trouble. So a lot of cases will get decided, but not all of them. But again, another reason to make sure you are signed up and receiving the free and premium offerings that Democracy Docket have. Thank you all for watching this episode of Democracy Docket. You can find a complete list of all of the active election lawsuits and materials we have mentioned in the description below. And let me say, we are just a few thousand of you away from 100,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel. So if you're not already, become one today. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.